Spoiler warning, the following review contains major plot spoilers. I first watched this film years ago when it came out back in 2020, before I was on Letterboxd and way before I was doing reviews. I remember I enjoyed it, but it didn't really leave much impact or made me want to learn about the production of this film. Second time around, it was a completely different experience. This movie does some things that I think deserve way more credit than people give, and I go into insane detail of its story logic. Really quick, if you haven't already seen The Devil All the Time, here's the timestamp to skip ahead. The Devil All the Time is a 2020 Netflix film directed by Antonio Campos, based on the 2011 novel written by Donald Ray Pollock, who so happens to be the narrator of this film as well. It follows Arvin Russell, a young man raised in rural Ohio and West Virginia. His father Willard came back from World War II broken. Literally right off the bus, he met his wife, had a kid with her. Arvin found religion and slowly destroyed himself trying to protect his family from the world through prayer and sacrifice. And a bit of throwing hands. Arvin grows older to inherit that darkness after both of his parents die. The film cuts to roughly 20 years and follows multiple characters across two tiny towns, like a couple of preachers, a pair of serial killers, or a corrupt cop. It stars Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, Bill Skarsgård, Riley Coe, Jason Clarke, Sebastian Stan, Harry Melling, and Haley Bennett. A very stacked cast. And there's a quick recap. Obviously, it doesn't do justice to the full movie, so be sure to check it out. Alright, let's get to the breakdown. Editing and CGI. There's no big CGI shots really worth talking about. At most, it's just to remove something in the background or cover up a camera's reflection, which for this movie is a very good thing, because it means that they shot a completely practical and time period production, which I gotta say, visually pays off. So let's talk about the editing, and more specifically, one big moment that takes place. I'm talking about Robert Pattinson's delusion speech. His character Teagarden is a mid-sermon who goes on a whole big rant, getting louder and louder. His acting was okay, and I'll talk more about this in the performances section, but it was actually the editing that made me love this part so much. The second he says devil, it hard cuts to Arvin, played by Tom Holland. Then he says the word Lord in his monologue, and it cuts straight back to himself, which slightly makes me think of the fall of Lucifer. Now, I'm not here to make a theological argument, but I'm using the comparison as a storytelling archetype. My connection between the two is the idea of something being labeled evil all the while the corruption exists somewhere else. That's what I think the edit during this moment is trying to imply. Same with the story of the fall of Lucifer. The editor on this project is Sofia Supercasso, who also happens to be the director Antonio Campos' wife. Around the 1 hour mark into the movie, there's this really cool flashback cut. After Arvin beats up the guys that were picking on his sister, he's suddenly transported back to watching his father clean blood off of his hands as a kid. My biggest criticism is that this creative approach of editing moments only happen in the first half of the film. The last hour of the movie runs off of the story's momentum rather than the cool shots that make me go, whoa, let me see that again. 3.5. Visual language and videography. Within the first 4 minutes of the movie, we get one of the best shots across the entire runtime. During a flashback of when Willard was serving during World War II, they find one of their own crucified, which I found was a great introduction to what kind of film we're watching. Director Antonio Campos and his DP Lol Crowley built the entire visual language of this film around two big main references, Andrew Wyeth paintings and William Eagleson photography. The idea was to start warm and earthy in the early timeline and let the palette shift, more pastel, more artificial, more wrong as the story darkens. And I can't lie, in that regard, they pulled it off. They shot on 35mm film, Aerocam LT and ST bodies, sometimes using Canon K35s for intimate close-up shots. There's some handheld energy here and there, the kind of energy where the camera feels like it's actually in the room with these people, and then there's the opposite, wide locked-off frames where the characters are pushed to the edges in that 2.40:1 ratio, which Crowley specifically said they chose because it let them exploit the space around people. There's also a recurring visual thread that I want to call out super quick. There's a painting of Jesus carrying the cross that appears twice in this film, and it means something completely different both times. The first time, it's hanging when Willard first passed. It represented his burden, the man he had to shoot on that crucifix in the war, and the man he molded himself to be, the faith he weaponized against himself. Then, the second time, it's older Arvin standing in front of it, loading Willard's Luger. Same painting, same room, but now it's his son who's taken down this burden. Where it loses a point for me is how it gets in the second half. Kind of the same issue with its editing. The first half of this film is so deliberate, and then once you're invested in all of the characters, it feels like the film just stops trying as hard. The creative shots just kind of stop. 4 out of 5. Story logic. The big sell of this film is that all of the characters are intertwined and connected, so I wanted to talk through it visually. This film has 9 major characters whose lives intersect across 20 years. And when you lay it out all in order, it's kind of insane how tightly constructed the web really is. It starts with Willard Russell, a World War II veteran hopping off the bus on his way home from the war. He then passes through a diner in Meade, Ohio, where we meet 3 people. Charlotte, a waitress who Willard eventually marries, and in the background, we meet Carl Henderson, a photographer passing through the town. He at the same moment meets, and later on marries, Charlotte's co-worker, Sandy Bodecker. Willard and Charlotte have a son, Arvin, and a couple years after Arvin is born, Charlotte gets sick. Willard goes nuts, crucifies the dog, rest in peace Jack, and Willard eventually kills himself not too long after losing Charlotte. Arvin found his father's body, gets the police to show up, who so happens to be Lee Bodecker, the sheriff of Meade, also known as the brother of Sandy Bodecker. Arvin gets sent to live with his great uncle and grandmother, Emma, who have also taken in a girl named Lenora. Arvin and Lenora grow up together as siblings. Now let's look at Lenora's background. Her father is Roy Lafferty, the first preacher in this story. Roy was from the same church community, which is how he met Lenora's mother, Helen. At one point, he believed God was testing him to prove he could resurrect people, so he took his wife Helen into the woods and stabbed her, then ran, leaving their daughter Lenora behind. Roy's getaway car broke down on him, which left him to resort to hitchhiking. He gets picked up by Sandy and Carl Henderson. Carl and Sandy are now a happily married couple, who pick up hitchhikers, photograph them, and murder them. Roy becomes their first victim. Fast forward a couple years later, Lenora is now a teenager and begins to get taken advantage of by the new preacher in town, Reverend Teagarden. He gets her pregnant, denies it, tells her to find a way to get rid of it, and then she kills herself. And by accident, because she fell from the stool as she changed her mind. Arvin finds out what Teagarden did, loads Willard's Luger, the gun that's been in his family since before he was born, and kills Teagarden in the church, which was deserved, so W. Arvin. Then Arvin ends up fleeing. Car broke down and resorted to hitchhiking. He eventually gets picked up by Carl and Sandy. They now have about 14 kills. Arvin clocks something is wrong, gets the jump on them, and then kills Carl and kills Sandy. There's also this whole plot about Lee finding out about Sandy. He burns all of the evidence because if it got through, his election would be toast. But whatever, I have more notes on that for later. Lee figures out Arvin is the one who killed his sister, hunts him down because Arvin is now counted as evidence. They fight, and Arvin kills Lee. And Arvin, this kid who throughout this story has lost his father, his mother, his sister, and killed 4 people across a 1,500-mile stretch of an American highway, gets into a hippie van heading to Cincinnati, leans back, and falls asleep to end the film. Now, can we talk about this web? Holy shit, it's impressive when you treat it like Pepe Silva.
Look in the mail. Well, this whole box is Pepe Silvia!
The fact that Carl walked past Willard in the diner before Arvin was even born, and then Arvin ends up in the backseat of Carl's car 20 years later. Now that's the type of construction that makes you want to rewatch this type of film again. But here's where it got me thinking a little. Sandy is actively murdering people in the same district that her brother is trying to get elected in. And the film just kind of waves at that and then just moves on. There's no dramatic collision of those two realities clashing. It's the laziest connection throughout the whole web, for sure. And like Carl and Sandy's motive is never really addressed. The film sort of implies just pure fun, or Carl's a sick fuck, but for Sandy especially, the narrator says she was always a little fucked up. I don't know about you, but when I think of fucked up, I think of some white girl named Stacy who you can't take anywhere. Not someone who murders 14 different people, but That's the explanation we get. And like I mentioned earlier about Lee, he burns all of the evidence of his sister's murders for his political career, just to get killed by Arvin anyway. His arc resolves in the least satisfying way possible. As for the evidence, he had multiple options to choose from, and he chose the very worst one. Wait a minute. Now that I think about it, he might have been a great politician. 3 out of 5. Sound effects and score. The first thing that really hit me going into this film was the music. It's eerie, yet it's almost hopeful. The score is composed by Danny Bensi and Sonder Jurians, the same duo behind Ozark, the OA, and this was actually their third time working with Campos. They did Christine and Simon Killer together as well. Beyond the score, the song selections are great picks. Campos made a deliberate choice to not just drop in the most obvious period-appropriate track every time a scene needs texture. The folk and country choices feel like they belong to these specific people in this specific place. Not like James Gunn going into one of his era playlists called 1950s Americana Vibes. And I don't know whether to put this in performances or sound effects, but man, the narrator's voice is gold. The single line, "It seemed to his son that his father fought the devil all the time." That line sent actual chills. And the narrator, Donald Ray Pollock, is the actual author of the novel. He has this deep southern drawl to him that's just perfect for this story. And finding out that it was the actual author narrating his own film adaptation just made it even more cooler. 4 out of 5. Performances. Let's start with Tom Holland, because his performance is genuinely underrated. Coming into this as Spider-Man, the friendly, quippy, likable guy, and then immediately being asked to play someone who carries 20 years of inherited trauma and has a completely warped sense of reality, that's a big ask. And Holland delivers. He said in an interview that he had to go places mentally that he never wants to go again. And with his performance, you believe it. Robert Pattinson as Teagarden is a completely different type of performance though. He avoided the dialect coach, showed up one day on set only then to reveal the accent he'd been building alone in his apartment. And look, it mostly works. He's manipulative and unhinged in exactly the right way, and does come across as an outsider. The director wanted Teagarden to feel like he came from someplace else, and in that regard, he did his job. But I gotta be real. In the delusion speech specifically, he goes too far. There are line readings in there where it crosses from charismatically unhinged into actively distracting. He knew it too. Apparently he kept cracking himself up on that line between takes, which is funny in the interview, but costly in the film. Bill Skarsgård as Willard is quietly devastating. He's a person who came back from war carrying something way too heavy, and faith became the only container he had for it. Skarsgård plays his grief so well, the type of wannabe macho man telling himself to man up. I mean, makes sense, he is from that generation. And Riley Coe as Sandy is just a whole nother highlight. She keeps picking these roles that nobody else is picking, and she always makes them feel lived in and so real. Sandy is not a sympathetic character at all, and yet Coe makes you almost understand her and at times almost feel bad for her. Harry Melling doing the spider scene with actual live spiders on his face, well, a bucket of them, is its own category of commitment. The acting is very well done, but with such complex characters behind every character, some performances walk away as gold, and some performances walk away as just plain dumb. 3.5 out of 5. And last, pacing. The pacing sadly follows the same issue in videography and its editing. The first half outshines the other half. The first half of The Devil All the Time's pacing is great. It's methodical, it's atmospheric, it's building up to something. You're actively watching characters get introduced across different timelines, and you're genuinely curious how it'll all connect. And then somewhere around the midpoint, it just coasts. Once you're invested in the world, you really start to feel the 138-minute runtime in a way that you weren't feeling it before. Certain storylines, like Carl and Sandy especially, get more screen time than their narrative weight actually justifies. Their thread runs long, but because there's no motive that's really explained or cared for, kind of just falls off. The narrator at times is also a part of the pacing problem. When you have a narrator doing that much connective work between scenes, you're essentially just being told what's happening rather than showing it. In a film that shoots this beautifully, that I found a pretty strange decision. The ending itself, I can't lie, I actually really liked. Arvin gets in the van, leans back, takes a big, exhausted yawn, and closes his eyes. After everything this kid has been through, yeah, that yawn was very much earned, and leaving Sandy and Carl's photo evidence for the cops is a smart, perfect final touch. My biggest problem with it was the road to get there. It was just uneven. And in a film with this many characters, unevenness will cost the effect that you're trying to pull off. And the last category score, 2 out of 5. So, where does that leave us? Overall, I score this movie a 3 out of 5, and I think that's an honest number. The Devil All the Time is a film that looks incredible, sounds incredible, and has at least 3 big performances that need to be talked about way more than they actually are. But it's almost weighed down by its second half, with a narrator doing way too much heavy lifting, and a runtime asking more of your patience than it actually earns. I won't lie, it's worth watching. It's worth rewatching, because I caught things the second time watching through that I missed the first time, but sadly, it's not the perfect Southern Gothic masterpiece that it was trying to be. If you've seen it, I want to know where you land on Robert Pattinson's performance. Be sure to drop it in the comments. And if there's a film that you want me to dissect next, be sure to drop those below too. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Thank you.